Okay, so this is going to be an introduction to debating. So it might be a little bit, if you've done some debating before, you might find some of it a bit common knowledge. If you have done a different style of debating, you might find some of it a little bit confusing. So I'm going to try and do a bit of an overview, but if you have any questions or there's something that doesn't make sense, let me know in the chat and I will be really happy to answer questions about how our style of debating works. Okay, so firstly, what is it? Debating is about convincing an adjudicator that they should do one thing instead of another thing. So that's a really important part of debating, is that it's competitive, not as in it's really aggressive, but as in you're comparing two different things with one another. So what you're trying to do is prove to the adjudicator that your side of the motion is better than the other team's side of the motion. And to do that, you're using skills like logical reasoning, persuasive use of language, good use of examples, and rhetoric. So those are the main kinds of skills that we're looking for to make yourself persuasive in debates. But the most important thing is the logic in the debate. So using reasoning and argument to prove that one thing is better than another thing. Okay, so in general, we start with a topic or a motion. A motion is what the debate is going to be about. Normally it is a statement like, we should all be vegans. And if you are, one side of the house is arguing that we ought to be all be vegans, and the other is arguing that we ought not all be vegans. So a couple of things to note about motions. If it says we should, or just like in general that we should do something, generally refers to our whole society or to our government. Sometimes the motion will specify a specific person, like that schools should do something. If it says schools should, you should assume that that means all schools in the context, so all schools in New Zealand. If it said a specific person or a school, you should assume that that means just one person or one school. Sometimes you'll hear motions that are phrased, this house believes that we should all be vegans. That just means the same thing. It's just a kind of old-fashioned, fancy way of talking. That just means the same thing, that as a society or as the government, we should do something or pass a law or behave in a certain way. Okay, so what kinds of topics will you encounter at regionals? So the first thing to say is that we try to set topics that are challenging, but not so challenging that you can't debate them. Obviously, everybody is at a different level, so sometimes you might find the topics a bit more challenging, and sometimes you might find other topics to really be in your wheelhouse. You just have to kind of give it a go, and if you get one that you don't like, chances are that the next motion will be something that is more suitable for you. Some common topic areas, they're education, economics, policy, social justice, all the kinds of things that you might be learning about at school or thinking about as subjects in school or as lenses in school. We try to debate about a lot of those different kinds of things. The best way to prepare for topics is to keep up with the news and to read a lot, watch, listen to things from a variety of different perspectives. That's a really helpful thing for debating, is listening to people who you disagree with and trying to understand, if you were arguing from that perspective, how would you argue from that person's perspective? How would you make a convincing case from an opposite perspective to the one that you hold? So I would really encourage you to read the news, but also try to seek out a lot of different opinions about popular topics or about debates that you maybe see in the media or that you see in the news. Okay, so there are two sides in this style of debating. One is the affirmative team, the other is the negative team. So when you're on the affirmative team, that means you're arguing for the motion. That means you have to propose that we do something related to the topic. When you're on the negative team, you're arguing that it would be better if we didn't do that specific thing. You can argue that we should do something else, instead, or you can argue that we should do nothing about the problem. So, for example, if it was the debate about veganism, on the affirmative team, you can't say, oh, well, we should all be vegetarians because that's kind of similar to veganism. You have to support what the motion is, which is that everyone should be a vegan. On the negative team, you can either say, we don't think anybody should, we don't think that everyone should be a vegan. We shouldn't do anything about the environment. Or you could say, we think that we should do something else about the environment or something else about animal welfare. But what you can't do is also support everybody being a vegan. So if the topic was that we should increase the minimum wage, if you were on the negative team, you might say, well, instead we should invest more in small businesses and grow the economy, and then that will naturally make wages better, or something like that. But you can't say that you would do that and that you also support raising the minimum wage. You can support something else, but you can't support the specific thing in the motion. The last thing is that you don't get to decide which side of the topic you're on, and over the course of the tournament, you will get roughly equal number of affirmative and negative sides. If you find that you're 2/3 of the way through the tournament and you've only been on the AF, you should let your convener know, and they will check to see if there's something that's gone wrong on the tab. Does anyone have any questions about topics? Okay, so a question about whether students can bring prepared materials. No, unless it's for a prepared topic. So if you're at Kaharangi Marlborough Regionals, for example, and they have a prepared topic for the first debate, and you're allowed to have additional help. I'll talk to you a little bit more about how much outside help you can have when I talk about the different kinds of prep times that there are. And then the second question is about how much the negative team can disagree with the terms. So we generally say that it's best to if somebody sets the debate up in a way that is patently unreasonable, it's fair to disagree with that. But as much as possible, you should try to argue on both grounds. So if you're going to dispute the facts, you should say, firstly, we disagree with the terms for this reason, but also, even if that were the case, here's some other additional reasons why it might be wrong. I know that's really difficult to do in practice, but that's the thing that you should try to aim to do, because you don't know whether the judge will agree with you that they were unreasonable or disagree with you that they were unreasonable. Hopefully that makes sense. Okay, so how do you win debates? You win by convincing the adjudicator. That's really the be all and end all of it. There's no automatic wins and losses. There's no adding up the total column of points for having the best the largest number of metaphors. You have to convince the adjudicator on the grounds of the argumentation that you provide. So what are things that adjudicators are looking for? The first and most important thing that adjudicators are looking for is because statements. So that is saying, this thing is true because of this reason. So if you feel like you have got really good arguments, or you have really good presentation and adjudicators are saying to you consistently that they didn't find it persuasive, or that they thought that there wasn't a lot of depth there, it's because there isn't enough substantiation with because statements. I would recommend that you write the point out and start writing because on the piece of paper before you even know what the because statement is going to be, to really give yourself some mental triggers to remember to do that as much as possible. So anytime you make a statement, this is true, why is that true? This is true because. Okay, the second thing that adjudicators are looking for is examples to use as evidence. Examples are persuasive, but they're not as persuasive as because statements, because it's easy to find an example that supports one side of the house and then another example that's equally true that supports the other side of the house. An example is most persuasive in conjunction with a reason, a because statement. This is true because, for example, here, the next thing that adjudicators are really looking for is comparing your own reasons to the other team's reasons. So being really, instead of just saying our reasons are really good, making sure that you really are saying, here's the reasons that we gave you and why they are better than the reasons that the other team gave you. Or here is our example and why it is more true than the example that the other team gave you, as opposed to just, here is our example and here's why it's really good. Because as I told you at the beginning, it's about comparing two things. So you might convince the adjudicator that your example is completely true and really important, but if the other team convince the adjudicator that their example is also true and even more important, they're going to win the debate. And then the last thing adjudicators are looking for is rhetoric. So that's about using your words and your voice to show importance or emotion or urgency. You're not going to win debates on style alone. That's not the kind of debating that we do at NZSDC, but it is an important factor for making adjudicators care about what you're talking about in the debate. Okay, so in terms of the basic rules for this format, this is called 3v3 or Austral style debating. Because it's the style, there are 3 people in each team, and because it's the style that's prominent in the Australasian circuit of debating at university. It's also sometimes described as Schools Worlds style because it's the style that's done at the Schools Worlds competition, but we normally say 3v3. So the basics are, there are 3 people on each team, and then one person gives a leader's reply. Speeches are normally either 5 to 6 minutes or 7 to 8 minutes long. I'll go through with you how long speeches are at each different regionals in just a second. Replies are always half as long as regular speeches. So if your regular speeches are 6 minutes long, the replies will be 3 minutes long. I don't know, if you moved to an alternative universe where they did 16-minute speeches, replies would still be half as long. So no matter how long the speeches are, replies are half as long. And then we also offer points of information. So that's a short question that you can ask speakers of the other team, and I'll explain a little bit more about points of information and how they work. One thing that's really important about speaking times is that they are a hard limit, not in terms of maximums, but not a hard limit in terms of minimums. So you can't speak for longer than 6 minutes. There's a little bit of grace time, like, 6 minutes 15, 6 minutes 20 is fine, but the adjudicator is probably not really listening after that. But if you only speak for 1 or 2 minutes, that's fine. Again, it's not an automatic loss. There's no deduction of points automatically based on how long you speak. It's just about the arguments. And if you feel like you've made the argument that you wanted to make and you're ready to sit down, you're perfectly free to do that. Okay, so here are the speaking times by region. The reason they differ region to region is that we try to match them up with the most common speaking time at regular competitions in that region. Or if there's not a regular competition in the region, then speaking times are 4 to 6 minutes because that's what we think is the right balance for most regionals if people aren't used to speaking longer than that. Again, it's a maximum, not a minimum. So if you look at that and you're kind of like, oh, I'm never going to be able to talk for that long, that's totally fine. But yeah, just to let you know that those are the different speaking times at those competitions. Okay, prep time. So as I've kind of already explained, some competitions have a fully prepared topic. Most debates at regionals are half-hour prep, and you can't use the internet and you can't have any outside help. So that means that if you want to, you can take in a piece of paper, that you have written that has like the time that the debate starts, and you might want to write out like, the room that you're going to and the topic and stuff like that. That's fine, but you can't talk to anybody, get any ideas from anybody. You can't bring in notes that somebody else has written for you for the debate. that just means that it's an even playing field for everybody, and it doesn't advantage teams who maybe go to schools where they have teachers who know a lot about debating, or there are other students there who know about debating. It just means that everybody's on the same playing field. So if you have 4 people in your team, your 4th member can swap in for debates, but they can't help you prep, because it wouldn't be fair to have 4 people prep for one team and 3 people prep for another team. At nationals, this is a hangover from another slideshow, but at nationals we do 1 hour prep time, but none of the regionals, apart from maybe Auckland seasonals, I'm not entirely sure about that, but we do half-hour prep for regionals. Okay, those are the rules for debating. So what I'm going to talk to you about next is kind of tactics. So what we recommend that you do, but they're not hard and fast rules. It's like when you play any other kind of sport, there are certain rules and then there are certain things that are good practice. So, you know, you wouldn't automatically lose a basketball game if you didn't do any, if you didn't mark players or mark zones. The umpire wouldn't be like, you're not doing any marking, you're not doing any defense, you automatically lose. But it would be pretty hard to win if you didn't do some kind of defense. So these are the same things. They're things that we recommend, but if you don't do them, it doesn't mean that you're automatically going to lose debates. So I would pick a couple of things from here and try and work on them and improve them slowly. Don't bite off more than you can chew and try to change everything about the way that you speak, or feel disheartened if you can't implement every single thing the first time. You would never expect yourself to master a sport and every play in that sport the first time either. Okay, this is just a bit about how the room is normally set up, but your adjudicator should do that before for the first round.